I'll kind of go into, I guess, a part of who I am that might be even different than what people who listen to my show hear about, because I usually talk about the now. Um, so I am the son of a going back to my early childhood. I'm the son of a college baseball coach and an elementary school music teacher.
Mm.
Um, and everything about that upbringing explains me in, in all kinds of ways. Um, and I grew up seeing, like, on the field, watching my dad coach his players, and was greatly impacted by the psychology of that, and what it means to be a high level group performer. Which there are surprising parallels between teaching choir and coaching baseball, and I do that now with my son at a competitive level. He's 14, and it's really not all that different. The
Mm.
things that we're trying to get them to do and motivate young people to pay attention to the details, to take the technical aspect of what they do seriously, but also let's have fun, and let's try to find those that balance between excellence and accessibility. And can we get a guy on the team who's new to this, but can we coach him up, and can we put him next to the more expert player? Like, we have to do this in choir classes too. And so that was a formative thing. And then my mother was a church musician and elementary school music teacher. I was raised in a pretty fundamentalist offshoot of the Methodist Church, and in that part of the country where I grew up, in the middle of Kansas, like right on the middle of the map. In Kansas, it was kind of frowned upon for women to keep their day job once they had kids. It wasn't like a rule; it was more like a socially enforced norm, if that makes sense. So as soon as
Mm.
I was born, she stopped teaching music, and for some reason, in that environment, it was a totally double standard. You can keep your church music job, just not your
Mm.
other other music job. We can't have lose the music director at the church. So she kept that, and so I grew up watching her lead the music at our church, and that's actually where I learned to read music, was out of the hymnal. So that was my introduction at age 4 or 5, even to notation, and trying to figure out when the notes go up, my voice gets higher, and when the notes go down, my voice gets lower. And when it's filled in, it doesn't last as long. And like, nobody really taught me explicitly. I just kind of learned it the way that little kids learn to read, if they're exposed to it and have some guidance. And I figured it out kind of on my own. And so I don't remember what it's like to not read music, which made me a terrible teacher for about the first 6 or 7 years that I was teaching, because I could not identify with, like, well, this is so easy. Why can't you why can't you do
Mm.
this? And had to reinvent my pedagogy related to, well, okay, so what if someone has no idea? Then where do we start? So that those things have kind of all, I guess, intertwined into making me the person that I am now, which is, of course, high school choir teacher. Um, I recently, most of my career, have also done church music, but I am done with that now, at least for the time being. I was able to drop that part of my work life just this last Easter. Was done with church, but I still do lead a professional ensemble and a here in Kansas City, and a community organization around that ensemble. And then the Choralosophy podcast. Those things make up my work life, and I really love all of it. And in addition to coaching baseball, so that kind of gives you an idea of where I spend my time and energy.
When did you know you wanted to be a teacher?
Ooh, that's a good question. So that has a very concrete answer for me. There is a story, and because even though my mother was a teacher and her mother was a college professor, piano professor, it never dawned on me in my teenage years at all that I would also be a music teacher. It just didn't even cross my mind. I sang in high school, of course, and I was pretty good at it. And I knew that I could probably get some scholarship money for it, but that's really as far as my thought process went. I didn't really think I want to be an opera singer, or I want to do, like, I didn't really have a career goal. I just knew that I could pretty much go to college for free and sing, so I'm going to go do that. And there wasn't really a plan in mind. I started out as a voice performance major just because they told me I was good and I should do that. Like, there wasn't really like, it was very like 17, 18-year-old boy going with the flow kind of a thing. Now, at that time in my life, my mother had cancer, and she passed away in November of my senior year of high school. And so that contributed, I think, to my floating in the wind status because I really wasn't thinking a whole lot about school. I finished high school with a 3.1 GPA because I never did homework or that was my score from showing up basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like wasn't really a focus of being a high flight academic student or anything like that, or really even thinking ahead to school. And so I made the decision my senior year that I was going to go to UMKC, the conservatory here in Kansas City, mostly because I felt like I needed to make a decision to stay close to home because I grew up here in Kansas City. Because at that time, when I was making those types of decisions, I wasn't sure how long my mom was going to be alive. So it was kind of touch and go. So I was like, well, I'm not going to go away to Chicago. And because even if she passes away in the next few months, she had a terminal diagnosis. And like, I'm not going to go away to Chicago. Northwestern was my other choice that I've been accepted to. And but then she passes away, and then I've got to come be back by my brothers and sisters. I'm the oldest of five, well, four at the time, and so there were all these decisions that were going into it. Anyway, fast forward to about I think my third year of undergrad at UMKC, still a performance major, and I took and I needed an elective. Basically, I needed what I perceived as an easy class to fill in an elective spot in my schedule, and I took Intro to Music Education just on a whim. And one of the assignments for that class was to go find a local high school or middle school who would allow me to tutor slash give lessons to somebody who didn't have a teacher. Like, so somebody who needed lessons hadn't, didn't have supportive parents to pay for it, or just for whatever reason had never taken lessons before. That was part of the stipulation of the assignment. And so I went to my alma mater where I went to school and asked my old choir teacher if there was anyone who fit that description, and could I come for 8 weeks and teach this kid a lesson once a week after school. And then the project in this class was that you do this 8 week project and you then write a report essentially on what you learned and what it was like to be the teacher for the first time. And I had no idea what I was doing, and it was a really good that I was not charging him money, because it was for because that would have been that would have been unethical in all kinds of ways. But it turned out I did an okay job. I think I got him to make some noises that he had never made before, and I started to see after 4 or 5 weeks of working with him the look on his face that was happening when he was starting to make sound that he didn't know he was capable of doing, even in that limited amount of time, and giving him that confidence boost. And I just remember at one point towards the end of the project thinking, like, somebody would pay me to do this like every day. I could I could do like this could be a thing I do. And that was actually the very first time it had even crossed my mind that that might be something that I would be interested in doing. So it was a very much accidental falling into it without much plan. And then I went, as soon as that project was done, I went and had a meeting with my guidance person or my advisor there at the conservatory, and asked what would it be like for me to switch to music education. And they said, well, basically, you'll become a second class citizen here at the conservatory, because this is like and that was the word that they used, because this place is built for opera performance, and
Mhm.
that's where all the resources are focused. So I would recommend carrying a double major, so that you don't lose your voice studio, you don't lose all the vocal training that they're going to not prioritize once you're a music education major, which is its own kind of travesty. And but So I did that for a while, but then then that didn't last a whole lot of time. That essentially culminated with a conversation with my dad. Keep in mind, my mom, my music parent, had passed away already, so my dad was not really a music parent. I think he played baritone in the middle school band, but that's about all the music my dad did. And there was a conversation about a year after that. I had added the music education major. I was still doing voice performance, so I was trying to carry both. A lot of the classes are the same, of course. And I was sitting on the couch in my dad's house practicing some music for a choir concert, and I had my choir folder, and I'm making my marks, and I'm listening to CDs because I'm old with in a Walkman CD player, and trying to get this music down and working on it. And I was working pretty diligently for quite a while. He'd walked through the room a couple times, and at one point he stopped and he said, "So, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm practicing for the choir concert." And he said, "Oh, that's cool. Um, aren't you like an opera major though?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, well, whenever I see you practicing, which is not very much, you're never practicing opera music. You're always practicing your choir music. Why don't you like
Mm.
be a choir major? And I was like, whoa. Like, and it was essentially correct. And of course, that's that baseball coach psychology thing again, where he's trained to notice where kids and where players put their energy is an indicator of what they should be doing. If you've got a kid on your
Mhm.
baseball team who says to you verbally, "Oh, I want to be, why coach, why can't I be a pitcher? Like I want to pitch. I want to be one of the pitchers." And then you observe them at practice and they're never working on that part of their skill set ever,
Mm.
well then you're like, you
Mm.
don't really want to be a pitcher. You
Mm.
want to say you want to be a pitcher, but you're not actually doing it. And so of course I think that's what he was observing. He was like, you say you're there for opera, but you never sing opera. And I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, okay, well, then I probably shouldn't be I probably shouldn't be an opera singer." I have a big loud voice, but that's not enough. Like there's more to it than that. And so anyway, that kind of gets me to that's my music education story. I kind of fell into it stumbling, but then once I got there, just never looked back. Like it was that was where I was supposed to be, and I think I probably needed to find music education the way that I did, because it needed to be like a my idea, and it needed to seem and feel like I was discovering something. I think if if a parent had tried to push me into it, I probably would have resisted it, that kind of thing, just because I'm stubborn. So that's my story.
Hmm. What an incredible legacy that you are this combination of your parents, that
Mm,
you both get to be what they were, the baseball
right.
coach and the music teacher. I think that's just that in itself is so beautiful. And I want to go back for a moment because you were talking about your mother and you didn't say when she was diagnosed or how long you had to deal with that during high school,
Mm,
which I cannot even imagine, just getting through it. Like you said, I mean, having a 3.1, I still think is pretty incredible with the situation you were dealing
yeah.
with, which also I think is a testament to the fact that you're smart and that you could still probably get by on that with, not,
I was getting by. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
you were getting by.
Yeah.
So then when you went to college, I'm curious as to what was your attitude toward learning when you got there? Was it the same as when you left, or were you reinvigorated? Did you feel different about it?
That's a good question. So to answer part of your question too, my mom was diagnosed probably when I was in ninth grade. So we were dealing with it all through high school. So
Mm.
it was one of those situations where at first, anytime someone's diagnosed with cancer, hers was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a nasty bug, and not really a bug, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Um, so it was one of those things where, like a lot of times, an initial diagnosis, you have a long period of being really hopeful, like that. Oh, she'll be fine. Like she's going to do the treatments and she's going to have the chemo, and it's going to be rough for a while, but I'm sure they'll take care of it. That kind of thing, and that went on for a couple of years, and then there was some kind of relapsing and different types of things that happened. So it was an ongoing thing all the way through high school. Now, it, I don't know I don't know that that impacted ever my attitude about learning,
Mhm.
because one thing I would say as an educator that I still, whether this gets me in trouble with other educators or not, I feel it genuinely, which is that going to school and learning are not synonyms
Mhm.
necessarily. I will always have had a good attitude about learning. I didn't always have a good attitude about what was happening at school, just because it wasn't my priority. Like there were, and it wasn't that I didn't like school. Like I had a good relationship with school. I just it was never the thing that I was at the forefront of my mind. And I think in order to do well at school, you kind of have to put school first, for the most part when you're a student. And I just never really got to that point as a younger kid, because I was either worried about stuff going on with my family, or also sometimes in very real ways I was the caregiver for my younger siblings for a good portion of my high school, because my parents, not only my mom was sick, but my parents were divorced and remarried and pulled in multiple directions, and I was the oldest of these kids, and I was the one with the car, and I was the one with the ability to be home and be present, and play chauffeur and all those types of things. And so the school was just kind of on the back burner for a lot of the things, unless I really loved it, in which case it was, choir and my humanities classes that were poetry based and history. I loved those classes. And I did the bare minimum in all my math and science classes because I didn't care. That was not something I really cared about. So when I got to, I would say, undergrad, especially for those first 3 years where I was kind of spinning my wheels, singing because they were paying me to sing for scholarships, and people kept telling me my voice was pretty. So that was really the only motivator that I had for singing. And so I would practice for sure, like certain basic levels of practice, and I would work on my choir music because I was finding passion in the group there that I was singing with, and all of those things. But I wouldn't say I really learned how to be a student in a scholarly way, the way high flying students are, until grad school, really, because I was continuing to just float by on my generally high communication and verbal skills and verbal IQ, and memorize most of what the teacher said, but not have to go to the library and study stuff. And I really good at BSing my way to a B plus on a paper without a lot of without a lot of preparation. And I was able to still skate by on those skills for most of undergrad. And it wasn't until, I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of our students, as educators, a lot of our students fit into this category of, until their fire gets lit for something, there's not really a reason to dig deep. And so for me, that was when I finally figured out, okay, I am going to be a choir teacher. Like I have a path, I have a goal, I have a mission. I've developed, like in every undergrad music education course, you got to write your why, like you got to write your why, like your educational philosophy before you graduate, and like what kind of teacher you are. And oh my goodness, I don't even want to know where my paper is that I wrote at that, because I'm sure I would be horrified by my why at the time. That was really the point towards the end of undergrad, was when I finally took things seriously enough to make sure that not only was I turning in schoolwork, but I was turning in quality schoolwork, because I want to be really good at this. Like I want to be the best possible choir teacher that I could ever be. But I didn't really have that feeling towards, I don't think I ever thought I want to be the best tenor in the world. Like I never thought that, but I started thinking things like that about, like, I want to be the best high school choir teacher that these kids have ever had. And I want to be better for them. That didn't really happen until I had a reason to light that fire, if that makes sense. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And actually, you answered another question I was going to ask you, which
Mm,
is, what is your voice type? That was the other thing as I was waiting to ask. And I'm listening to your speaking voice, and
hmm.
it's hard to tell because sometimes you listen to people speak. Like I have a lower speaking tone, but I'm a high singing soprano, and so you
Right.
can't always tell. So here I am, like also thinking, what are you? And then you went ahead and said it anyway. So I was like, okay, yeah.
Well,
So
so keep in mind, I'm also 46 years old and I've been coaching baseball.
oh
So
yeah.
my voice is destroyed right now.
Mm,
And it was something I'm actually very stressed about, because I also do still sometimes sing in professional choral ensembles, which right now is just not something I can do. And I'm hoping that I can again when I'm done, because I'll be done in July coaching my son's baseball team, because then he'll be in high school and he'll be playing for other organizations and teams and stuff, and I'll be able to finally take a step back and let him do that. So I'm really hoping at that point, because ultimately, for people who aren't sports people, um, I have to be loud. It's like it is a cultural expectation, but also the center fielder's 300 feet away from me, and if I need him to move, I have to yell. And so it is. So my speaking voice now is noticeably lower and more gravelly, and it
mhm,
makes my it has had a real impact on my teaching demonstration ability, which I've always really relied on, having an above average vocal technique for a high school choir director,
mhm,
because of my training and background, and I've been able to really kind of inspire kids to work harder on their voice with different demonstrations. And I've been open with my students about it. Like, guys, I'm sorry, I can't do this right now. Like, I can't sing for
mhm,
you, because everything's either really low or really loud, because with all the inflammation in my folds, it's
Mm.
from yelling. I can sing, but only if it's loud. And as soon as I try to back off, it has to, it cuts out. And so, yeah, I'm stressed about it, but that's a different topic. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm a tenor who's getting older and is yelling too much, which is why I tricked you.
Well, and so you might have said this already, but can you just remind me if you did, when is it you're going to be able to sort of step back from that, from the coaching?
First week of July is our last event, our last tournament. And
Okay.
then from that point on, he will play for a high school training program that I don't coach.
So you'll be done at that point.
I will be just a baseball dad at that point, which I'm really excited about.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations. That's really, really wonderful. You've been able to like be with your children in that way.
Yeah.
So I want us to move into, you know, where you went after undergrad and we'll get into that. But for a moment, I keep thinking about what it must have been like. And it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of a kid who had their mom was diagnosed when they were in ninth grade and everything that came with that. And so I was wondering first, how were your teachers with you when you were in school? You know, how did they interact with you? But then also, how did your experiences as a young person with everything you've experienced, not only your mother's illness and the loss of your mother, but being the oldest sibling, having to be a parent figure to your younger siblings, that's a lot of adversity, a lot of
Mhm.
things to, a lot to be pushing back against. And so I wonder how then that's affected your approach as a teacher to your students as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I'll start with this, which is that uh, childhood trauma, which really for me started much younger than ninth grade. My mom went through a ton of stuff even before her cancer diagnosis. It was, and I won't go into the details, but there, I essentially had to become an adult when I was 11. My mother was assaulted at when I was 11 years old by a home invader, and I was the one who found her, and so
Mm.
that was I became the caregiver in that moment. And of course at age 11, your brain's not wired for that kind of shocking visual, nor level of responsibility that you have. And so that's one of the reasons they describe childhood trauma as an event that oftentimes will rewire a person's brain in some um, real concrete ways. And so, then just kind of moving forward from there, it was health problems. And just I always describe my mother's last 7 or 8 years of her life as just uh, a tragic comedy of errors, none of which were her fault. This type of thing. And so one of the things that I explain to people about childhood trauma that I think sometimes gets missed, probably because it's uncomfortable to talk about for a lot of people, is that it does in really important ways contribute to who I am today in many of the ways that I love about myself. That if those things had not occurred, I wouldn't have learned certain important lessons about who I am that makes me the parts about myself that I want people to love about me and that I love about myself are there because of those experiences. But I would never wish them on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a tension. There's almost like a contradiction internally with us when we think about things like that within our own lives. Of like I wouldn't want to experience the terrible thing again, but I also wouldn't want to lose that resilience that I have. I wouldn't want to lose that perspective that I have, the ability to appreciate smaller good things because of the terrible things that I've experienced. I can pull more joy out of them than maybe the average person can because they have joy inflation if they've not experienced those types of things. And so it's tricky. And so to answer your question fundamentally with students, um, I it's done two things, I think, to impact my teaching. One is that I haven't, I, it's easier for me to not assume with every student that I teach that there isn't something like that going on. In other words, I shouldn't assume that the smiling teenager in front of me is not wearing a mask. And so that's important. But then the other part of it too is that it has created a probably a persona that really believes in a certain degree of tough love with kids, because they need all humans do need some amount of challenge, and for lack of a better term, adversity. In a classroom, in a loving classroom, the adversity can be doled out in the right dosage, in a loving environment, which is a whole lot better than experiencing it out in the wild like I did. And so, because I, at the same time, that's where that tension comes in, where I know that we need our system needs to be challenged in order to grow, but we would obviously hope to do it without traumatizing anyone. And so having that perspective really, I think, creates the kind of teacher that I want to be. That doesn't mean that I always get it right. And that is also something that I share with my students. Like, I am going to try to push you past your comfort zone. And that is going to happen in this class because it's a performance based class, and singing in front of people is scary. And we're going to, like, these are things that you're going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I might push you. Sometimes I might push you too far, because I think that the greatest evil that could happen here is that I don't push you enough. And then you leave my class not ever knowing what you were capable of. And that's what I won't do. And so I'm always going to err on the side of, like, we're going to go do this.
Mm-hmm.
And this test is going to happen, and that kind of thing. And so those all, I think all of those philosophies come from my childhood experiences, also pulling in a little bit of what it means to be a baseball coach into choir class. All of those things go together into kind of creating the kind of teacher that I am now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love sports analogies. I think that they're awesome to use in the choral classroom
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we talk about being the singing athlete, right? We are
Yeah.
athletes. We are using our bodies. And I think that's such a huge shift for, especially I think boys, even in middle school, to talk about it that way. And so I love the parallels between those things. When you were talking about how you would never wish the experiences you had on someone, but you're also like, you're thankful for who you are now. It actually reminds me of one of the greatest lessons I learned with my first therapist. And she said, you can hold more than one truth at the same time, and they can even
Hmm.
be contradictory to one another. And
Absolutely.
now that seems so obvious to me, but at the time it was a huge light bulb, mind blowing moment of like, really? So you can say, I feel bad about all these things that happened. They were painful. I wouldn't wish them on anybody. And also, I wouldn't give up who I am today because of those things. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. And so I want to get into young professional Chris Munce going out into the world. Now, did you go right into a job, or did you go in get your master's degree right away? Take us through that.
Yeah, so after undergrad, I attended a job. Well, I guess my last year of undergrad, I attended a job fair
Mm-hmm.
where different employers and graduate schools and different, it was basically like a what to do next thing that my university put on. And the HR person from a school district nearby had set up a table, not just for music teachers, just teachers in general, that were coming out of UMKC at the time. And I stopped by and I picked up an application, and the lady started talking to me, and turned out that their assistant superintendent of human resources, that was person that was there, also had a degree in music. So we had a conversation, there was a connection, and then we had 5 or 6 minutes of a talk, and she said, well, we do have a choir position open. And I think I had charmed her at that point enough, to where she basically told me right then and there that she thought I would be perfect for it. And so that was my February of my senior year of undergrad. I already had a job. Like, she told me right then and there, fill out this application. I know the principal. I'm going to talk to him, and I think that we're going to be able to get this position filled. So all the rest of my classmates are freaking out, trying to find jobs all the way through, and I was good. And so it was a high school choir position at a um, large-ish suburban high school in Kansas City, but in a relatively economically depressed town outside of Kansas City at the time. That town has come a long ways, and since then, this is 23 years ago, but that was my first job, and I taught there for 2 years, and I followed. Let me just put it this way: the way it was described to me when I took that job is. That I could, I can see, I'm trying to remember there was an older teacher who told me that something like I would be able to walk in there and make fart noises at the kids and they would think I was walking on water, because the teacher that was there before was so bad
Mm,
that, like, this is a perfect first job because you cannot fail. Like, if
mm,
you're just have a good attitude and try to teach them some basic stuff, they're going to love it. And you don't have to follow somebody that was like, a beloved retired teacher situation. It was
mhm,
actually a teacher who had been fired that I ended up
mm,
replacing. And the kids hated him, and it was this whole thing. And so ended up being a pretty awesome first job. And of course, looking back on it, I was a terrible high school choir teacher my first year, but I didn't know it at the time because the kids were so excited to just be singing. Most of what they had done the previous year was like sing along with CDs while the choir teacher sat in his office. So it was like a choir class again. And so that was a really successful thing, although it did definitely set me up for a false sense of security, because the job ended up feeling really easy the first year, which I every teacher I talked to, like, the first year is typically not super easy and like a perfect, like, I didn't have any discipline issues the first year. Kids sat down when I told them to sit down. They stopped talking when I told them to stop talking, and it was the easiest thing because they were starved for a choir class.
mhm.
But that honeymoon was over by year two. So year two was way harder than year one, and so that was an interesting thing. And so I think that was really year two when I realized that I was terrible, because I wasn't, um, every success I had earned in year one, or I'd had in year one, was not earned. It was, I lucked into it. There was no structure. There was no, I don't even think I had a syllabus. Like, I just showed up with like choir music and I passed it out, and we were just having choir practice. And then I learned more later about the guardrails and the playpen that you really do have to build so that there is an expectation, and what happens when kids don't meet the expectation, and all of those things. And so that was really the journey of year two. And then from there, I ended up, kind of a long story, I guess, but I'll tell the short version of it. I had planned, my hope was to then go back to school part time, keep my job there at Belton High School where I was at the time, and then do part-time masters in conducting. And the masters in conducting at UMKC was designed really for an on-campus resident student. So it was not designed for a part-time student who's full-time teaching, but they had, based on my begging, basically made an exception for me, where I would get to, as long as I could get to campus at a certain time each afternoon for ensemble stuff, and I could take some of my evening classes, I could do some summer classes, and take my voice lessons in the later afternoon, all these things that went along with the conducting degree. And so I had all that set up, and I had gotten permission from my principal, verbally gotten permission from my principal, to rearrange my schedule for my third year, for year three at that school, to have my plan period last, so I could simply just quietly sneak out a little earlier than the other teachers, so I could get this master's degree. And the way I had explained it to him, and he agreed, was that this is an investment in me so that long term I can build this program, because that is my plan, and that was my plan. Well, anyway, fast forward to the last week of school, and I'm about to go start this master's program in the summer, and then in the next year, he's walking past me in the hall and nonchalantly says, "Oh, hey, Munce." I'm like, "Oh, hey." So yeah, that whole master's degree thing for next year with the schedule, we're not gonna be able to make that work. And he just kept walking. And of course, I'm following him.
Oh.
Like, what? Wait, what? All these things that I had arranged. They're making an exception for me because you said you would make an exception for me. I've signed all kinds of stuff for them, like I'm a graduate assistantship that they're paying me for. all this stuff. And basically it was just, well, I talked to the guidance counselors and that was kind of a pain in their butt to redo your schedule. So we just decided not to.
That's like the
And
first like
so I'm,
real kick in the pants, like about the real
yes.
world and teaching in a public school system. Oh,
Uh-huh.
oh.
Yep. Yep. And so this was like a week before school's out. I already signed my contract for the next year.
Mm.
And I was heading down to our state solo and ensemble festival with the kids there the last week, last event really of the year. So maybe it was more than a week before school's out, maybe the last month of school for sure. And so I went down to the state festival and started kind of sharing my story with some of the more experienced teachers and some of my mentors from the state of Missouri that would have known me and what I was trying to accomplish at the time. And one of those teachers, just who knew me since I was 14, basically said, "You need to quit that job. You
Mm.
need that because if he's gonna treat you that way now, then that does not bode well for his investment in your program going down. Like the things that you think you're going to get to build there are not going to be supported if he's willing to throw you aside that easily."
So
And
calloused in such a calloused
Mhm.
whatever way, like it's not even going to affect you at all, you know.
Right, like no big deal, we just can't do it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I did. I broke my contract and left, and they didn't end up penalizing me because they were able to fill the job and all of that. But I left at the end of the year, had to tell the kids almost at the very end of the school year that I was not coming back, even though we'd already made all these plans for the next year and stuff like that. So they were crying, I was crying. It was bad. But it ended up being putting me in the right place at the right time. I was able to finish my master's quicker
Hmm.
than I otherwise would have done. Spent a year or so living in my dad's like bedroom off by his pool, and sleeping in because I was poor, and all of a sudden, and and then that made me available for the job a job at Lee Summit High School that came about. That's where I currently teach, and that is also where I went to school and in the district that I grew up in. And that came about because now I'm suddenly only taking classes and I'm not doing a full time schedule anymore. And because I had tried to do some summers and other things to get the master's done part time already, I breezed through my master's degree. And there was a situation where um, the choir teacher that I followed, so my predecessor at my current school, was teaching the choir program. At that time, she did not have an assistant, and there were 400 kids in choir. She was there by
Wow.
herself,
Whew.
and and it had to do with just growth in the town and new schools being built, and then they didn't want to restaff with another teacher as they pulled one from another building, etc. And so she was at her wits' end and nearing retirement age, and found out basically that I was not full time. And kind of word of mouth, she talks to another teacher that knows that I'm just finishing up some classes for grad school, and I get a phone call that from her that says, I hear you'd be available to come teach at Lee Summit High School." I was like, "Well, I mean, I don't like I'm in school." And she said, "Well, yeah, but I need you here as much as you can be here." And at that point, I was thinking like I'm going to volunteer to get some extra experience to just show up and help her because she was one of the teachers that I had as a kid. Um, and I was, but she was like, "No, we need to pay you. Like we want to
Hmm.
hire you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So basically, I had a class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a music history class that I did not need because I'd already met the requirements. I dropped it, and I started showing up. They hired me in like September of a school year that had already started in August because she was desperate. Like she just needed help, and she had gone into the principal's office basically, um, and she's already at retire. She could have retired at any point, but she was kind of a legend there in town. And the story, her version of it was that she said to the principal, "I am drowning here. You need to let me hire Chris Munce right now, or I'm retiring."
Hmm.
And so they did. They hired me as a para that first year. So that way they didn't have to go through all the hoops of hiring a teacher. They just hired me as a classified employee with an hourly wage. And that was ended up being perfect for me because then I could leave whenever I wanted to go finish my master's stuff. And I could just show up whenever I wanted to, clock in and help her in whatever way I could. Then graduate with the master's. And they hired me as a real teacher the next year.
Hmm.
And then Carla retired and I took over. And I've been there ever since.
Wow, what a story. Like it's
Mhm.
like all this adversity and and then you get to this other, you get to this next season of your life, this next part of your life, and these doors start opening for you in these
Uh-huh.
extraordinary ways. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, just in the right place at the right time. Um, having because of course if I had been still full time doing masters and teaching full time when that job came available, or when she needed help at back in my home school,
Hmm.
then I would not have been available. I would not have been able to take that opportunity. So, you sometimes things are accidentally awesome.
Accidentally awesome. You should make a
Yeah,
sign. Accidentally awesome.
yeah.
um, and what great advice. Like I've been in a position too where someone said to me, like, Megan, it doesn't matter what you do. It's like you're in an abusive relationship. This is about a job many jobs ago. And it's like you just go, if I only do this, they'll stop hitting me. Like they'll love
Hmm.
me. They'll finally love me. And the truth was it wasn't going to work that way. Like you just sometimes you're in a position where you can try all the tricks within administration, and there's no magic thing that happens, and you have to say to yourself, I deserve better than this. And it's so hard to leave those kids. But man, that advice was so good that that teacher gave you, is like, look at how nonchalantly he passed by you and said, "Oh, I totally changed your life, or I totally made this
Right.
decision, and I'm treating it like, hey, so we won't be hanging out after school today." That's how, like,
Yeah.
how
Right.
chill he said that. Like,
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
I just, how cool. And so you've been at your current school for how many years at this point?
Just finished 20.
Wow,
Hmm.
congratulations.
Hmm.
Oh,
Thank
so
you.
let's talk about your time in this new school then, like the school you're still at. What did you approach things differently? What did you, I know you did. I'm sure the answer is yes, you did do things differently than you did with
Hmm.
the other job, but I'm curious as to how you were like, okay, this is a new job. Although you had already been there as a para and you knew the kids and the program in that way, what was it like when you stepped into the, now I'm the choir director, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So, I mentioned that in my first year or two that I was pretty bad at everything, just didn't know it. I was good. I think was pretty good right away at making connections with kids and making them feel like part of something cool. I'm a good salesman. Um, but as far as the actual teaching kids to be good at stuff, I was pretty terrible at that. And so the way I would describe my first 2 years at my second school was that I just kind of gradually started sucking less at it. There was not um, like a magic bullet. I think my biggest barrier when I came back after grad school to start teaching again was that I really thought, probably just because college or teaching college age students had rubbed off on me in a negative way. Meaning, I would say that when I taught my college students, I directed a choir there during my grad studies. I also taught a couple courses and different things, and college students kind of just use their teachers for their mind. Like there's less of I felt like they just put information in my brain and let me go away. There was not as much of a program building and relationship building impetus as there was in high school. And I think that's really why I decided to focus on high school as my life's work, rather than going into higher ed and trying to direct college level choirs. I was recruited and headhunted for that my whole career. Um, but I just I don't want to do that. I don't really have any desire to do that, partly because of those relationship pieces, which makes high school really special.
Hmm.
Um, and so my first couple years there, hadn't figured that out yet. I thought that I could still go in and just impress those students at this bigger, more successful program, that I could really win them over by impressing them with how much I knew about music and how beautiful my conducting was. Um, and of course, that's stupid because high school kids don't care about that stuff. Like they care about whether or not I'm able to connect with them. And I had kind of lost track of that. Like, so I feel like when I was in my first 2 years of teaching, I was good at that right away. And I lost that part of myself by going to grad school and being, having a pedigree as a conductor. Suddenly that became, when I went back to teaching, my focus until I realized that that made the kids hate me. Like they did not want to sing for a great conductor. They want a choir teacher. And in secondary school, those two things are not the same. The super dedicated kids in a high school choir, when they go off to sing at all states, those are the kids that appreciate a great conductor. That is not your everyday average high school choir student. There's different things that have to happen for them to be successful, and so I think I was teaching to those top 0.1% of kids in my first couple years back until I figured out how to get back on the right track. And I think so. I would describe probably year 5 was my first really, really good year of teaching. I think that's how I would describe it.
If you're willing, I want to take a little jaunt to Choralosophy for a little
Sure.
bit and talk about that, but then I want to end by coming back to you as a teacher.
Okay.
So let's get into, how did Choralosophy start, and what has that journey been like for you?
Whew. Okay.
Big
So
question, right?
yeah, for sure. So it started in February 2019 was when I launched my first episodes. And what I had done was had planned ahead of time that I was going to launch the show during ACDA National in Kansas City, because at that time my professional choir had been invited to both open and close the conference as part of the opening ceremony concert and part of the closing concert. And what a great opportunity to print up programs and put an ad for this new podcast. Who'd ever even heard of a choir podcast? There weren't very many at the time. There was really one. Um, and and put that advertisement, and already had, before the conference even started, already had episodes recorded. I think I did 4 that were already completely recorded before the conference started, so that as soon as somebody saw this little ad, they could go check, and there would already be content there for them to hear. And so that was my, I guess, marketing strategy to start.
Where did
And
the
then,
spark come from to do the
oh,
podcast? And where did the
yeah.
name come from?
So the spark to start it came from me needing to figure out another job to do, because I had lost a church position that was very highly paid. So it was probably at that time a third of my income, and they were running out of money and just chose not to tell the staff. And so I got 2 weeks notice for a job that was really like the reason we could afford the house we were living in, the one I'm currently sitting in, was because of this extra job on top of my teaching salary. And without that job, we couldn't afford this house. It's a nice house, and definitely nicer than most teachers without a extra 33% or so of salary on top of teaching. And so the teaching, or sorry, the pastor there at that church also was a pretty dismissive administrator, in that he didn't seem to recognize how big of a chunk of my income was gone, when I tried to hold him politely accountable for, why am I only getting 2 weeks notice? This is insane. Like this was January of a church year where the other churches aren't hiring their directors in January. They want to start with the liturgical year and, like, all these things. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to find a job again anytime soon. But this paycheck is how I pay my bills, and we might lose our house. And he's like, oh, but I just thought this was like extra change for you. Oh my God. You have no idea. And so, long story short, it's actually another beautiful story. One of my many kind of visceral stories that have shaped my life, I guess. But I'm typically, I always have been before the podcast, even, a very open communicator. And when something's going on, I tell people. I don't sugarcoat things. It's why typically people either love me or hate me, and there is no in between. Because some of the social norms related to, sugarcoating a bad news message around people, other people just know to do that, and I don't really know how. And so in my last rehearsal, I just let everyone know there at the church, like, how screwed I was. Like, I'm really screwed. We're already looking at selling our house. And the church choir, which was furious that I was being let go, because they were also kept out of the loop. Like, they didn't know that they were losing their choir director either. And so in that rehearsal, they were livid, and they brought the pastor down into the rehearsal and chewed him out. And in that moment, they decided to get together. Basically, there was an old rich base who was 92 years old and one of the kind of like big name on the big skyscraper attorneys in Kansas City, who said, had anyone told me that this was an issue, I would have underwritten Chris's salary in perpetuity,
Oh.
but nobody ever asked me. And this was a guy who'd been singing in the choir for 50 years there,
Mm-hmm.
and so they decided that they were going to continue to pay my salary as out of their own pockets for 6 months when they found out what, because my family went there, like my kids were growing up there,
That's your
all of
church
these.
too. That's your
Yeah,
church home,
right.
and yeah,
Yeah,
in addition to your job.
right. And so of course this embarrasses the pastor because
Yeah.
he's
Oof.
like, so they're gonna so essentially every month then for the next 6 months, I got in the mail about 7 or 8 different checks that totaled what I had been getting paid
Mhm.
by the church, because they were just keeping an organized like system of who's going to chip in, to make sure that I have my paycheck so that I have some time to get to that next hiring season,
Mhm.
for church directors. And so during that time, I was given a gift of time by those beautiful, amazing people. And so during that time, I started second guessing, like, so is church really where my passion is, and is that really what I want to do to get to make that income back? Um, and it was suggested to me at the time by a colleague that, there's this podcasting thing that's really picking up steam, and you are such a nerd when you talk about choir stuff and all of the philosophy stuff that you talk to and teach the kids at school about. And there's one of the colleagues that was there at the school, and when you start talking, people listen, and
Mhm.
you could just like turn on a microphone and do what it is that you already do, and maybe that could be your job. And of course I laughed it off, like it and
Sure.
I came home and told my wife about it, and she laughed it off. It's like, oh, your cute little podcast idea. But I started thinking more about it, and thinking strategically and entrepreneurially, then putting that together with also the opportunity at ACDA that was on the horizon at that time.
Mhm.
I thought, you know what? I've got this gift of 6 months where I don't have to work with this extra job. Why not just dive into this podcast thing and see if it works? And so that's the spark for it. And then, of course, it got some pretty good traction right away. But then also the pandemic hit, when I was less than, well, about almost exactly a year in. And at that point, the show blew up. And so at that point, I was really able to treat it like a job. And now it's a job that is almost equal to in time and in payoff financially, et cetera, as my other jobs, my school job, et cetera. And so now I do think of it more as a content generating business that I really enjoy doing, and I get a lot out of it. It's very fulfilling. Excuse me.
What are your favorite things about? Oh, wait, you didn't answer where the name
Oh,
came from. It's a great name.
oh, right.
Great name.
So I am a philosophy nerd. I would say that I've probably read as much full length philosophy books and essays and all that as I have about music and choral music. So those were my two, I guess, academic passions. And if I could took electives and different types of things, they were philosophy electives and theory of knowledge, and different aspects of like how we know things and why we know them, are things that I'm just a nerd about it. I've always enjoyed learning how other people think and
Mhm.
why they think what they think. And so the name for the show really just comes from my two passions. Excuse me, I need to get water.
I was just going to ask you. Go ahead and get water.
Yep, yep. And I left it in the other room. I'll be right back.
You're good.
I always record with it sitting right next to me, but I forgot it. All right, so yeah, so the name essentially comes from the marriage of those two passions of mine. Of course, ever since I started it, my business oriented dad has reminded me that it's a terrible name because people won't know how to pronounce it, and they won't know how to type it into stuff. And he's been mostly right about that, but he also said that about my choir that I started called Konterei because it's a German word. It's
Mm-hmm.
like people won't remember it. They don't know how to pronounce it, so you shouldn't name your you shouldn't name it that. So you don't want barriers to entry for your customers, et cetera, that kind of thing. But I ignored him and did it anyway. And yes, I've gotten tons of jokes of people saying, I thought it was colonoscopy, all of that. I actually started listening to it because I thought it was colonoscopy. I've
Oh
had all
my
those
gosh.
comments, that kind of thing. So, but that's where the name comes from.
Hmm. So two-part question. First is, what do you love most about doing the podcast? But then for those who are interested in doing something like this, maybe I know there are people out there that are thinking, oh, maybe I want to get in on this game. One of the great things about it is the entry, like anybody can do it. They could do it on a phone, they could do it with very little equipment. Um,
Yeah.
but what advice would you give to them? So both, what do you love about it, but then what advice or even caution, right? Maybe would you give wisdom?
Yeah. Well, so yes, anyone can start one. In fact, I think there's something in the neighborhood of like 47 million podcasts or something
Mm-hmm.
stupid like that. Um, the vast majority of them, probably 90% of them, don't make it past the first 5 episodes. Um, and there's reasons for that, obviously, because I think a lot of times what ends up happening, and I do get questions a lot from people who are interested in starting podcasts, and they ask me um, for advice on how to start one. And so the first thing I always say is, well, why do you want to start one? Because that matters. And then the second thing I ask is, why should anyone listen to anything you say? And that usually offends them.
Mm,
Um, but that's an important question. And so if you're going to start a podcast, I think you should have a pretty solid answer to both of those questions. Like,
yeah.
what is my goal, and what do I have to contribute? Or else you could start one, but then you're going to be talking into an empty hallway. Like there has to be some reason. So, for example, I feel like by the time 2019 rolled around, I had had enough successes as both a conductor in professional ensembles, performer in professional ensembles, and pedagogue, where I have things I can help younger teachers and even teachers my age do from actual success that I can point to, that I can demonstrate. So it doesn't mean that everything I say about how to teach is the correct way, but it is a correct way. And there are things that I can offer. Whereas if I had started the podcast when I was in my first year of teaching, or my first 4 sucky years, I don't think anyone should have listened at that point. And so I think there is, no matter what the topic of a podcast is, there needs to be some reason for a person to tune in, and there needs to be a value that you're offering, or else it's not going to last very long. And then, so the things that I love the most about it are just the opportunities that it has given me to meet people and form relationships with colleagues around the world. There have been many situations where a Choralosophy podcast episode has turned into friendships and collegial relationships that otherwise never would have been a possibility for me, being isolated in the Midwest. So that's been a pretty amazing thing. And I also would say that doing this show has continued to make me a better teacher,
Mm,
because every single, like, I will often, this is possibly could come off like a humble brag, I guess, but it's true. I think there is not a single choir director in the entire world at this point who does as much PD as I do,
mhm.
because every single week I am getting a master class from somebody who's smart about something.
Mm,
And what kind of incredible opportunity is that other colleagues don't get to do? Obviously, people can listen to the episodes, but I almost think that I get more benefit because I'm the one who gets to have the conversation. I get to follow my curiosity and go talk to these really smart people and present these things. So those, I mean, really, it's so incredibly fulfilling, and I get so much benefit out of it. My students oftentimes know that I'm bringing an idea into the classroom that I learned from someone on a podcast, because they know that it's suddenly new. Like, we're trying something new. Like, Mr.
mhm.
Muntz must have had an idea from a podcast. They make fun of me for it, but it is always causing me to innovate. My classroom environment is different every year, because I'm constantly learning new ways to try to make it better, and I think in a lot of ways that has worked.
Hmm. What has been a challenge with the
Mm,
podcast, and how have you used it as a growth opportunity? Because I know that that's how you, just from listening to you, that's sort of your thing, right? You're not going to just lay down and go, okay, and give up. But
right.
just in what I've heard of you talking about the show and how many years it's been going, you celebrated 7 years. Is that correct?
Yep.
This year.
Hmm. Yep.
So, and I know you put out an episode about that and you talked about some of those challenges, but I'd really appreciate it if you just shared a little bit with my audience over here. And then yeah, how did you work through that?
Well, so I would describe the challenge as this. Anytime, so well, one of the things that if somebody's listening to this right now does not listen to Choralosophy, one of the things that you should know is that my my approach to what those episodes oftentimes are is to challenge a lot of status quo thinking, challenge dogma within our profession, and push the envelope related to what it is that I think we could be doing for students and singers and communities and whatever topic I might be exploring. I'm kind of approaching everything with that lens of kind of almost serving as a cultural critic for our ecosystem that is music education, that is choral music, that is voice teaching, all the adjacent areas that I touch on the show. And anytime you do that and put your opinions that are especially not the safe mainstream opinion that is supported by professional organizations like ACDA, or will go on a banner for Chorus America, or if the slogan, even if you like kind of pick apart a slogan because you don't like the word choice,
Mm-hmm.
somebody's going to be offended. And if because it's the internet, and one of the things that I've learned over the years is that I cannot predict by something I put online, who will or won't be offended, or if someone will or not, because the internet is such a vast place that you will find somebody who's in a bad mood about almost everything you post. And so if you decide that that's going to be your standard, like I want to make sure that no one's offended by anything that I put online, then your show, with respect to anyone who's trying to do a show, will be the most boring thing on the planet, because because real conversation has to risk somebody being rubbed the wrong way, or else we're not really pushing enough of the envelope to have to really get anywhere. And so that's kind of been my ethos, and so that has come with its own challenges, because there are definitely people within that ecosystem that see what I'm doing as being a challenging and therefore offensive, but also b, as my platform grew, especially after the year 2020 and into 21 and 2 and beyond, that there are some that really see it as a threat to their ability to set the agenda, because there's this outlet for criticism of the agenda, whatever that agenda
Mm-hmm.
is for organizations or different types of things. And so those challenges have come all the way in the form of, um, you know, local colleagues who just won't talk to me anymore because I'm seen as controversial by them, or uh, colleagues that will have outwardly called for my career to be ended, and in a very public ways, all just and everything in between, really. So there's the subtle blacklisting. There are it's come a lot with a lot of like messages of by the hundreds of people who will say things like, thank you so much for what you do. I can only support you here in private messages, but thank you for this show and all the things that you're talking about. And, it's really good that you're talking about it. I can't say anything about it publicly, and that's why I never comment on your stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's like, that is just such a common part of what I do. And so that can make it feel lonely at times.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of ways, it's become a mission that just goes just beyond doing it as a job, because I see my role now as, there are certain conversations that have happened on the show that if I wasn't going to have it, no one would.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I wouldn't have it if I didn't think it was important. And so, so that's kind of, that's how I guess that answers the second part of your question, is how do I deal with those challenges? Is that I believe that what I'm doing is important, and I believe that it's helping people. And as long as those things remain true, then I'll keep doing it. And I also just kind of have a personality that allows me to let certain things rub off my back. And probably part of that is my upbringing and what happened, like the things that I've been through in my life. There's a certain amount of things that are a pain in the butt that I just like, that's not a real pain in the butt. Like, oh, somebody doesn't like me. Oh, like it's that doesn't, I don't need everyone to like me, as long as there are some people that do, and that's great. And so that's kind of how I process that. I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing those different things. And so I think that's ultimately how I would describe it. It's like, if what you're trying to do is create a show that really generates a lot of interest and intrigue, then you're going to have conversations that they can't hear other places. And so that's essentially been my business model, so to speak, in Choralosophy, is trying to create episodes that you're just not going to find elsewhere.
Hmm. Well, for one, I really appreciate what you're doing. And I know that as educators, we wouldn't tell our students, well, I'm going to tell you what's true and then you're going to shut up and do it. Like, I mean, I
Hmm.
feel like great educators, they breed like curiosity into their students. They want their students to be curious and ask, well, why? I even think when you're presenting warm-ups, whether I'm doing this in a choral setting or I'm doing this at home with my studio, people want to know, why am I doing this warm up? Why are we doing it? What should you be feeling? And instead of just, well, here's what my choir director did, and now I'm just passing this down. And so it's that piece of the ability to question. And even if someone disagrees with you in the end, it's always better to walk away having thought about it. I always say, so I also do like writing and editing work with people, and I tell them that feedback is a win-win situation, because you're either going to listen to what I have to say and you're going to say, yeah, that is better and it improves what you're doing, or it's going to challenge you to think about the original decision you made, and it's going to make you stand by it that much more, that you're,
Right.
I mean, and so that's how I look at it. So what you're doing, and you said it, you wanted to help people. That's why you
Hmm.
started it. And so
Hmm.
if we're ever in a situation where we say, well, we can't question that, well, we can't, it's dangerous to have an opposing opinion, then we're not in a healthy situation. So I really appreciate you opening up about that. And I would ask, is there any question I have not asked you that you wish I would have asked you, or anything that you wish you would have gotten to talk about that you did not get to say?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I would well, I would add this then, I guess, partly to your last question, still about, the challenges of doing the work that I've been doing, um, which is really that our profession, our choral music profession, is a very interesting ecosystem of people, and this could just also get me in trouble. So maybe this is your chance to have a hot take on the show, but um, that choral musicians are typically people who grew up wanting to perform, and or people who performed as kids and ended up being like the best singer when they were in school, and then ended up, like, because this is also me, right? So that ended up being a teacher through a variety of different paths through, but the I'm going to say it this way: the failed performer turned teacher is not an uncommon path to becoming a choir director. It doesn't describe all of us, but it is a not an uncommon scenario. And there is a certain amount of, I would say, disproportional amount of choir directors who care very deeply about the public perception aspect of what it is that they do, in a very different way than, say, plumbers as a, as a profession. They're gonna throw "I'm the best plumber in the world" on the side of their van, and they're going to
Mhm.
drive down the road advertising how great of a plumber they are, without any concern in the world that some other plumber might get their feelings hurt.
Mhm.
Because other plumbers get it. Like, okay, so he's trying to work. I'm the best plumber on my van too, and we can both drive down the road with our slogans on the van, and I'm not hurting him, and he's not hurting me. But in our profession, there is a um, there is a bias against what I will get, and I get accused of this all the time, that I'm just a grifting self promoter. And that's used as a pejorative against me on a regular basis. That I'm a self promoter, um, and and of course my response to that is, well, yeah, of course, I'm trying to make a living. I'm trying to feed my family. I'm waiting for the part that matters. Like, what are you talking about?
Right, and I'm
Um,
offering something of value, like I should get paid for my work.
right. Um, and but in very few other professions, I guess that's my point.
Mhm.
Would that be an issue? Because I think there's this underlying jealousy that happens when someone else is, because we're all self promoters. Performers all are. Like, everyone
When
is.
you said
I think that.
ecosystem earlier, you said ecosystem, I
Mhm.
almost thought you said ecosystem because it
But that too.
really it feels
Yeah.
like that. Well, and you do,
Uh
you
huh.
have to have a certain sense, a certain ego to be successful in what we do,
Yep.
so, yeah.
Yep. And you've got to be willing to put yourself out there so that you can offer something to the world. And so I think what ends up coming, a lot of the challenges that are, or the the people who see me as a negative influence on choral music, and those people are out there, uh, come because ultimately I think in a lot of ways I'm better at promoting the ideas than they are. And
Mhm.
so, and that's why some people would see me as dangerous, because I am dangerous to a person who doesn't like the stuff I say. Because if like, because if that's the case, then that's going to create danger for them in their ability to communicate their ideas. Now, of course, one of my policies, longstanding policies though on the show, is that if I say something that you feel like needs to be challenged, you get to go to the front of the line.
Hmm.
So come on the show and challenge me. But guess how often that ever happens? Like, almost never does the person who is willing to take these pot shots at me,
Mhm.
is then also willing to come and just say it to my face, like
Mhm.
like adults. And so I would actually love that, and I communicate that a lot. Like, I would love that, because that's, in my mind, that's how plumbers would talk to each other. How they would talk to each other. Like, hey, I don't like what's on your van, man.
Mm.
And they would just talk to each other, and so I think that's ultimately one of the reasons, also underlying reasons, that I do the show, is I believe that in a lot of ways we have some pretty toxic ways of communicating with each other in our ecosystem, to use your term. And so part of what I'm challenging is that very way of communicating. I think we should be more open with our ideas, because by my ideas, my actual ideas, mingling with your actual ideas in a conversation, our ideas actually make idea babies. Like,
Mhm.
that's how new work and new directions and growth in the profession, that's where it would really come from, is two people that don't agree about a topic actually having a conversation and finding a synthesis of their perspectives. And I think we badly need that in our profession so that it doesn't die. And so that's kind of what motivates me to deal with the bull crap.
Hmm. Last question.
Yeah.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Hmm. Like, when I'm like dead and stuff. Is
You
that what
can
you
take
mean?
you can take that however you want.
Okay. um, that's deep. So I would say I don't necessarily know that I want to have a legacy. I would say I want to have legacies, plural, because they're just as contextual for me as any other, as my work that I'm doing now. So, for example, I want to make an impact on my students. I want to make an impact on their belief in their knowledge and their ability to learn and do hard things, and I want them to see that I helped them figure that out, not because I need the ego boost, but just because I want them to look back on their time in my class and see it as valuable. And so that's a legacy. That would be like a legacy that I would want to leave behind. And over the course of my life, by the time I retire, I mean, who knows? I could teach 5,000 kids. And so that potentially could be a legacy. Then, of course, I hope to continue doing the show as long as I can. I don't see any signs of stopping at this point. And so there would be a legacy there. I would hope to leave behind an impact on the quality and the depth of the conversation within the art form beyond poster sessions at a conference, or behind presentations at conferences that are one way. That I could have given a gift to the profession of something deeper and something more that is possible to set a norm for collegial conversation. So that would be another legacy. And then, of course, probably the most important legacy that I hope to leave behind is in my family. I want to be a good dad, and I want my kids to grow up and be a better parent than I was, so that they can that I can be part of a growth legacy within our family as well. So I feel that way, I guess, similarly about all the areas of my life.
Mm. I'm so grateful that you were willing to take out some of the time from your very busy life and all the things that you do to spend some time with me. And I really have loved getting to know you as a person. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to get to speak with you, and for you to get to share with our audience a little bit about yourself. Thank you so
I
much.
appreciate the invitation. This is really, really fun. I don't, I'm pretty open on my show, but there's oftentimes not time or reason for me to go in depth about a lot of things. So I appreciate the opportunity to explore these ideas with you.